Okay, I'd like to welcome everybody to session number 46 in the book of Acts. We're going to be starting on chapter 20 of Acts, probably trying to get through about the first 16 verses. We just finished up chapter 19 last week, and you remember 19 took us about 3 hours to get through. 19 started off kind of strange, where we had 12 men that Paul ran into when we got into a lot of theological questions about when you receive the Holy Spirit. But these men were followers of John the Baptist and really had not known the full Jesus. So that was it. That's how we started chapter 19. And then you got into Paul's miracles and his strange miracles about even his handkerchief could cure people. And then you had the exorcists that thought that they could use the name of Jesus and the name of Paul to expel demons out of people. And we found out that they were run out of the house and naked and out in the street. So a little funny story that Luke throws in there. If you remember, Jesus I know and Paul I'm familiar with, but who are you? That's what came out of that middle section of 19. And we ended up 19 with the riot that took off about Demetrius as a silversmith losing his income because Paul was preaching Christ, and Christ was bringing people out of the pagan worship and out of Diana, and they were losing revenue, and so they created this big ruckus in the city, and that all came to an end last week. And now this week we pick up chapter 20, and it says really after these things or after the uproar. So this just falls right in line with 19, the way we're progressing here. And some people think Acts 20 verse 1 really should be part of 19, because that's how it just flows right out of 19. So with that, I turn it over to Annette.
So here we are on our journey, and I'm not going to go through this in too much detail because we're here right now, but we're going to have specifics about all this area. It's kind of confusing. So each slide will have its own little area, like this one. Yeah. So verses 1 through 6, after the uproar had ceased, Paul called the disciples to himself, embraced them, and departed to go to Macedonia. Now, when he'd gone over that region and encouraged them with many words, he came to Greece, and he stayed 3 months. And when the Jews plotted against him, and as he was about to sail to Syria, he decided to return through Macedonia. And Sopater of Berea accompanied him to Asia. Also, Aristarchus and Secundus of the Thessalonians, and Gaius of Derbe, and Timothy and Tychicus and Trophimus of Asia. These men going ahead waited for us at Troas, but we sailed away from Philippi after the days of unleavened bread, and in 5 days joined them at Troas, where we stayed for 7 days. So they were in Ephesus, the riot erupts. So they leave here and they go to Macedonia. Now Macedonia is this region, okay? And you see that they've come over to Thessalonica, they've got Berea. Down here we have Corinth. Doesn't say he went back to Athens. We've got Philippi here. So he's spending time, and we know he spent 3 months in Greece. So in this area, probably Corinth is considered Greece, so probably about 3 months in Greece. We're going to wrap up with a very interesting map about this time, the times while he was traveling. But my first question, so what region and who did Paul visit? And who was he encouraging in verse 2? It says, now when he had gone over that region and encouraged them with many words, he came to Greece. So I just really told you where he'd been, but what was he doing and who was he encouraging? So as is Paul's strategy, his modus operandi, the way he does things, he's going back to churches that have been established, and he's building up the believers there. He is reinforcing their doctrine, reinforcing that they're teaching the right things about Jesus, bringing them encouragement. And so he's doing that. During this time, though, This is not, it's kind of just, before we said, well, they went from here, then he went to point B, and then he went to point C, and then, it was pretty well laid out. And this one isn't quite as laid out right here in this section. And so it's kind of this unknown area of all that he did in every place he met and how long he stayed in each place. We don't know that. That's kind of just a gray area. One thing that some of the commentators pointed out, and so this is, I think, all speculation, is that if you go to Romans 15, they talk about him spending time in Illyricum, I'm not sure how to say that, which is in this area. And there's no mention in the book of Acts about him spending any time there, but in his letters that he wrote to the Romans, I think we know that he specifically states that. And so it's west of Thessalonica, so it'd be back here in this region that it was, and could be on the way to Rome, but I mean, it is a Roman province. He did spend time there. He did establish a church there. It's just not outlined here in Acts. So we think that things like that could have come here. I will show you the map at the end, but to tell you what the map is about, along this journey as well, all the journeys, but this journey, he wrote a lot of his letters, and we'll see where he was exactly when he was writing, but he was very busy for the 3 months he was in Corinth writing. So that's where he was, and he was just encouraging the believers.
So this next question seems to be very simple, and quite honestly, I missed it myself. But how do you think Paul felt about leaving Ephesus? He had been there almost 3 years. This was a core church. Actually, it's the first church in the letter that Jesus wrote in the book of Revelation, that John recorded in Revelation. Well, it was the letter to Ephesus. And so this was a very important church. He had a strong foundation there. And there's a couple of things that I want to get into here that I just didn't grasp. But we had one minister commentator, both, that spent 3 hours on this one question. 3 hours. You said, well, how can anybody spend 3 hours on that?
Well, that guy can.
Yeah, he can. So I'm not going to go into that in level of detail, but notice what it says here is that Paul called the disciples to himself. That's the people that are alongside of him, embraced them, and departed to go to Macedonia. We miss the fact that what does this embrace them mean? It really means he hugged them. He kissed them. And it is tradition, and for this region in this time period, to show your expression by, kissing, a man kisses a man on the cheek or over here, and they hug them. And what this is showing is Paul had a physical love for his disciples. What he got into is, if you express love by your words, that's shallow love. And so Paul didn't just express his love by his words. He expressed his love by his actions. And you say, well, his actions was he hugged the people. He showed them comfort. He stayed up all night teaching the people, and he offered his life. He put his life on the line for his people, for his church. So, I mean, that's love. He was all out love. And it shows the affection that Paul has here. And where I'm going with this is we think of love, and what do we think of? 1 John, right? The Epistle of John. We think of the love chapter, we think of John, but also remember Corinthians 13, first 1:13, which is really quoted just about at every wedding. That was written by Paul. So Paul was full of love, and we don't get that right away, but this whole issue about embracing his people showed he had a physical love, touching and ministering to these people the word along the way, as well as being selfless and sacrificing himself for all of his church, all of his disciples. And so I thought that was interesting. You kind of miss that reading through, just embrace them and you just read right through it. But it really shows how much Paul really loved his group.
So what can we tell about this group that accompanied Paul, other than their names are impossible for me to say, even though I practiced and practiced. So actually, before I get in that, I noticed, I just want to show you, it says he stayed here 3 months. When the Jews plotted against him, he was about to sail to Syria. So if you remember, Syria would have been, well, if I go back to this map, Syria's way over here. So he's in Corinth, and his plan had been to come and go straight back towards Syria. But when the Jews were plotting against him, he decided, okay, that was not the best option. So he went through Macedonia and came this route and then sailed down to Jerusalem, in Judea. So it's just interesting to see how this plays out. We're going to see another time where he changes his route and the way he gets there. But what can we tell about this group? And I'm not going to sit here and try to see if anybody can answer the question. I'll just tell you. So the first one, we have Sopater of Berea. First thing I'll tell you is all these names are Gentile type names. So they were probably Greeks, they're converts to believers. So we have Sopater of Berea. Remember, what do we know about Berea? Somebody knows this. What did the people in Berea do? They're a model for us. What did they do?
Don't we all want to be like the Bereans?
Okay, guys, somebody knows this answer, Syrians. Okay, the Bereans, if you remember, the Bereans, Paul taught them all day. The Bereans went back and they searched the scriptures to verify and find the proof and the evidence of what he was saying, that it matched the scriptures. And they were commended on that. And we are to do the same. When somebody tells us something, it's real easy to passively just hear a word and say, oh, okay, that's what that means. And what we realize is the more we're studying this, the more you find, oh, somebody can read this verse and say, well, this says this. And then another group will say, well, no, it says this, it supports this. And there are, I don't know why there's diverging ideas about what a certain scripture says, other than confusion, and Satan's happy that way. But they sought the Holy Spirit, they sought the scriptures to know truth. And so that's what we know about Berea. But we have Sopater from there. We also have Aristarchus. Aristarchus, we know from that name that he comes from aristocracy or nobility. So he comes from a wealthy family, maybe a ruling family. Interestingly, along with him is Secundus. Now, Secundus is the Greek for number 2. And interestingly, this kind of indicates he was probably a slave. So many households would number their slaves. So the first one would be Primus. The second one would be Secundus. If you had a third one, it'd be whatever the third word is. I don't have it here or know it. But this one was probably a slave. And the reason they were given a number name is the custom or the tradition at that time, or the reigning thought at that time, was that whatever you named, you owned. And it kind of goes back, they took it all the way back to Adam, where God gave him authority to name all the animals, and therefore man owned the animals. And so this thought has carried through Jewish tradition. And so it looks like we have kind of an aristocrat and a slave. Interesting. So already we've got probably a middle guy, we've got a noble, we've got a slave, and they are all together on one mission equally within the church. So it's just amazing to see how these people are working together. They're both from Thessalonica. Then we have Gaius of Derbe. Remember, Derbe was way back over from the first. Timothy, and then we also have Tychus and Trophimus. So we don't know anything about them other than these are 7 men. I do not believe they're probably from 7 different churches, but they are from churches. And what most people guess is that we know that Paul from last week, or is it this week? While he's on this journey, he's collecting offerings to take back, because the church in Jerusalem is extremely poor and under heavy persecution by the Jews. So the churches, the Gentile churches that are coming about, have a heart for them and want to help them. So they're gathering money. And so these guys are accompanying Paul to take these offerings back from their churches. And in knowing Paul and how he was so strict about money, and he was going to work and pay his own way and not take stuff from people, he probably, for accountability, wanted this group not only to bless them in being able to see Jerusalem and give their money to Jerusalem and see their money working, not only give them a blessing, but to also bless the church in Jerusalem by meeting these people. But what we do know is that we have a very diverse group, all from the church, from all over the Gentile lands where Paul has started churches, and they have all come together for a single purpose. Very exciting kind of thing that you can miss right here if you don't look into the background of what this is, these words are in these names.
Yeah, and an interesting note is there have 7 men. There's 7 letters to the 7 churches in Revelation. Some of the commentators try to tie these men back to the churches in Revelation, but that doesn't make complete sense, because Ephesus is the first one in the group, and it doesn't say any of them were from Ephesus. But 7 in the Bible is completeness. And so it's not unusual that 7, he took 7 as a complete number. That's God's completeness. So it's interesting, this 7, you're going to see that come up. You saw it in Revelation when we studied that 1,000 times, that number 7 comes up. And as you know, the number 6 is incomplete. And 666 is how we refer to Satan. He's not complete. So, but it's interesting how this all ties back together. But this very last verse, verse 6, what's important to note about verse 6? And I'm just seeing if you pick this up as she read it. What's the first 3 words? But we sailed. So what we have from verse 6 on, Dr. Luke is joining them again. And from what we're being told, Luke will be personally along the side of Paul all the way to his death. So Luke was out of the picture for a while. Now he's personally back on board. From chapter 6, we get that. It refers to we, and if you remember back when Luke was with them, he used we. It's a style of Luke's writing that basically says, okay, he's back on board. He's back as a companion to Paul moving forward. And remember, Luke is a doctor, a medical doctor, and Paul has some illnesses. And so most people think Luke is Paul's personal physician, as well as his writing all the scripture down. He may have been the one that wrote a lot of the stuff for Paul. We don't know that, because Paul's eyesight was not the best eyesight. We know that too from other studies. Okay, verses 7 through 12. Now on the first day of the week, when the disciples came together to break bread, Paul, ready to depart the next day, spoke to them and continued his message until midnight. There were many lamps in the upper room where they were gathered together. And in a window sat a young man named Eutychus, who was sinking into a deep sleep. He was overcome by sleep, and Paul continued speaking. He fell from the 3rd story and was taken up dead. This is a funny story that everybody probably recalls out of the Bible, the guy falling asleep. It's a funny story the way it's put in here. It's not funny that it happened, but it comes out. He was overcome by sleep, and Paul continued speaking. He fell from the 3rd story and was taken up dead. But Paul went down, fell on him, embracing him, said, "Do not trouble yourselves, for his life is in him." Now, when he had come up, he had broken bread, eaten, and talked a while, even until daybreak. He departed. But they brought the young man in alive, and they were not a little comforted. Again, this is Luke's style. We're going to get into that at the very end. So first question here, there's a lot going on right here, but I want to make it clear. This guy fell and was dead, according to Luke. Luke doesn't spend a lot of time about it. It's almost casual. So we'll get into some of that as we go through this. But the first thing here is, what does it mean to break bread? And then later on, it says that they had broken bread and eaten and talked for a while. What is the meaning? Because I missed a breaking bread.
I always took it, if you broke bread with somebody, you accepted them. I mean, it was more, if you won't break bread with them, you don't have a lot to do with them.
Okay, and that is true, Dennis.
Yeah.
There's two ways in breaking bread, and I wanted to make sure it was clear. There is almost like a potluck dinner that you get together, you fellowship with people. People bring their own dishes, and that's called really an agape feast. It's got a technical name. I can't say it. It's like Eucharist. But that's what you're talking about. The Eucharist is kind of a love feast. They get together, they fellowship, they're friends with one another, they talk about everything. But true breaking bread is the Lord's Supper. True breaking bread is remembering Christ and what he did. True breaking bread is breaking bread and drinking wine. It's not a feast. It's not eating in fellowship. And so I kind of missed that. I said breaking bread, and down here later it said that they had eaten. And you kind of think that this is, a big event. They got together, they ate, and it was a fellowship, and Paul talked. It was, but communion was there. The Lord's Supper was there.
The Eucharist is usually implying the Lord's Supper, and the agape love feast would be a separate thing. So Eucharist would be
The Lord's Supper?
the communion,
Okay.
and
The agape feast is the
is
other.
the other.
Okay.
So you wouldn't have it. The
separate.
Eucharist definitely is communion.
Okay, well then that's the breaking of bread. Eucharist is breaking of bread. I said it wrong, so it's a good point to catch it. So the point here is when we look at breaking bread in the New Testament, it is the Eucharist. It is remembering the Lord, and it's actually breaking bread in the wine. It's not a dinner, it's not a supper, it's not a fellowship. And so it needs to be, you need to look at it that way and recognize this is really what it is. It's not the same as getting together and having fellowship over a meal. Even though that was celebrated and that is done, it's called the agape feast. And so I want to make sure it's clear. I didn't understand that until I got into this. So I thought it was interesting.
The next question is, what's the first day of the week? And
Sunday.
okay, so when does that start?
The Jews, didn't it start at midnight on Saturday? I mean, on Friday?
Close. So the Sabbath.
Not midnight, sundown.
No. Okay, but no, you got it. You're right on the right track. The Sabbath for the Jews started at 6 o'clock on Friday night and ended at 5:59 on Saturday night. And the first day of the week started at 6 o'clock Saturday night and ended at 5:59 Sunday evening. Okay, so the first day of the week means that they are now, it is Sunday, which I didn't even know this, and I learned this through our study this week, that the word Sunday is honoring, or came because of honoring the sun god or some reason like that. And so a lot of believers won't call it Sunday, they call it the Lord's Day. But the first day of the week is our Sunday. And we know that, they say, well, why did the church, why did believers start meeting on the first day of the week? Well, not because they're just trying to go against the grain of the Jewish tradition, but because that's the day that Christ rose from the dead. And so traditionally they started meeting then as the first day. So pay attention then, when it says that Paul's speaking till midnight, he probably started about, it's not like he started at 10 in the morning on Sunday and was still preaching at midnight on Sunday. He probably started at, if they got together and had their thing, he probably started about 6 or 7 and was still going at midnight. But then we say that he did continue into the morning. We'll get into that a little bit more. But the first day of the week, just remember, it started at 6 p.m. Saturday night and at 6 p.m. approximately on Sunday night.
Yeah, and we have commentators that are not in agreement with that, because when you talk about a calendar about the first days from sundown to sundown is kind of the way Jews measured days. Romans measured it from sun up to sun up. So they measured it from in the morning to the morning. And so it's unclear whether this is really Roman calendar or Jewish calendar. If it's a Jewish calendar concept, then very likely that this is really what we're describing. But Luke is a Gentile, all right? He may be referring to this as a Roman calendar, which would have meant Sunday started at 6 a.m. On sunrise and would have gone all the way through, and he would have socialized with them and had dinner with them and then started speaking all the way to midnight and all the way to the next day. Again, there's difference of opinion. It's not a big deal either way. Just understand that you'll get differences depending on whether it's a Roman calendar or whether it's a Jewish calendar. So where did the church meet? Next question. And it's interesting to see the progression. If we go back to the first part of Acts and we follow its ways through, the church met first where?
In the synagogues?
No, in the temple.
Yeah.
Remember? They met and gathered in the temple. Then Pentecost occurred really out on the temple grounds. Then as persecution got heavy, they moved to synagogues, like you said. That was the next step.
Okay.
Then as persecution in the synagogues got bad, because it did, and they ran Paul out over and over again, then they started meeting in homes. And then eventually they started developing their own churches that were not like a synagogue. It was a church. So that's the progression. It was temples, synagogues, homes, and then buildings, their own buildings later. So I thought that was interesting too. We don't think about that, but that was the progression in how they met along this in Acts during the early church. The next one is, why is this miracle of resurrection even included here? Like I said, the nonchalantness that Luke uses is, oh, well, he fell asleep at night and fell down and broke his neck and he was dead as a doornail, and Paul went and laid on him and said, you're okay. And Paul went back and ate and talked some more. And then it ends with, and they brought the young man in alive and they were not a little comforted. Whew. Why is that like that in here? And there's not a clear answer. I'm going to give you options and you can take it from there. One, this is God's plan. What it does is solidify Paul in his preaching. What it does is prove that Paul is from God. There's some commentators that argue that the young man was not dead and that he was basically resuscitated, not resurrected. Luke would not have said that he was dead. He's a doctor. If he was not dead. So most commentators lean toward the fact he was dead and Paul did resurrect him, did bring him back to life from being dead. It's interesting the way he did it is he laid upon him. And that's something that has occurred in other times with Elijah and Elijah. Both of them laid on people to bring them back alive. Is that why Paul did this? We really don't have a clue. We really
Hey,
don't.
Dave, you know what I thought about? And this is just me thinking. Here this man was, he was in a window and he was really sleepy, but he stayed there. He wanted to hear what was being preached.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? He really wanted to, because me, I'd have probably went over there and found me a place to sleep. You know?
There's a couple of things that are a little funny about this, and I'm not talking about funny about his death, but he was sitting in a window, and if you notice that there were many lamps burning, and there's why so many lights at the last question. The lamps put out really burned up oxygen, so he may have been kind of in a daze anyway. There's one commentator, McGee. He loves this because when he's preaching and he looks out into his congregation, and surely when you're preaching, if you ever got up on a pulpit and you look out, you're gonna find somebody sleeping. You hope they're not snoring, and but you're gonna find people nodding off. And he says, "This is my greatest joy. I can see them nodding off. I don't care about it anymore, because if Paul couldn't keep someone awake, I sure the world can't keep someone awake." So it's interesting here. I think you're right. The guy did not want to go to sleep. He was there. We don't know much about him. I don't think he's ever brought up again. But this little comforted at the end, I struggled with that. And then you have to understand that that's coming from Luke. And he says it was no small uproar, or it was no, so a little was not a little comforted. This guy coming back alive into the congregation gave these people great comfort. That's what "we're not a little comfort" mean from Luke. So it means him coming back into this group was a great testimony for Paul and this group. That's what that really means.
So why do you think Paul taught for so long? So let's say he did start at 6 o'clock at night. Why is he still teaching at midnight and then on through the morning? Why do you think he kept going?
Because they were interested and it was going good. He wasn't going to cut it off.
Okay, and that's true. That's very true. But again, we want to go back and we want to read, what are these verses saying? So it says, "Now on the first day of the week, when the disciples came together to break bread, Paul, ready to depart the next day," don't skip over that, very important, "spoke to them and continued his message until midnight." So Paul knows he's leaving in the morning. This is my last night with you. Paul, in his fashion, is giving them everything, all of the doctrine of Christ, everything they need to go. He's giving it to them because he knows that he's leaving in the morning. I think that he would have known that leaving in the morning, he has to preach or teach as if it's the last time he'll ever see them. I think the Holy Spirit probably been working with him. I think he knew he had some difficult roads ahead, as if all of his roads hadn't been difficult. But I think he just knew that things could go a certain way. Maybe it was just kind of some wisdom that he was using. But he was preaching, I think, as if this is the last time we'd see him, and he wanted to give them everything he had, everything he knew. There is a scripture where he says, where it comes to him, he can stand fine because he knows that he gave everybody everything he knew about Christ every time he could. So that's why he taught so long. Whether it was 12 hours or 18 hours is insignificant. It was a very long, it wasn't a 40-minute sermon on Sunday surrounded by singing and other things. This was intensive teaching, answering questions, making sure they had everything down on Christ, who Christ is, what Christ did, and what's happening for us.
Where they were gathered at, you could believe the Holy Spirit was present.
Oh my goodness, yes.
Absolutely. The other thing that this points out is what Annette said. Many commentators bring up, Paul felt like this is the last time he'd ever be in Ephesus. He thought he would never see these people again. He thought his life is being challenged several times. He wanted to go to Jerusalem. Remember from the last time he was in the Spirit? to go to Jerusalem. Paul still, we're going to get into this at the very end. He still has these Jewish roots. But what did he say? I want to go to Jerusalem. I got to Jerusalem. Then I want to go to Rome. And then I want to go to Spain. So Paul knows he's going to be venturing and maybe never make it back here. As we come to the end of this chapter, where he calls the Ephesian elders back in and gives them a sermon at the very end of chapter 20. You know, chapter 20 is broken into 4 pieces. We're going to cover the first 2 pieces tonight, but we'll end up on the middle of the second piece and the third piece and 4th piece next week.
2 weeks.
2 weeks. 2 weeks off. So why was the mention of many lights here? This last question on this verse. Any idea? Why did it say that there were many lamps in the upper room that were gathered wherever they were gathered together? Why is that included in Scripture? Why do we need to know there were many lamps in the upper room? Really, Luke? Why did you put that in there? And I'm asking this because everything in the Bible, we need to ask that way.
There was no darkness in there.
Do what, Bobby?
There was no darkness in there. There were lamps.
Right. Well, and that's one of the reasons, actually. There's no real explanation, but Luke adds it here. So obviously when he adds it, commentators go crazy about it, right? We get something like this thrown in out of nowhere. Well, there were many lamps. What does that mean? And we got all kinds of meanings, which could or could not be true. But the fact is that Christians are the way. Remember, we use the way as how they refer to the Christian movement. Is the way they thought was done at night and with dim candle lights, and they hid themselves. They were in secret. And this was kind of, some commentators felt, this was like saying in your face, we're lighting up this place with all these oil lamps. This is bright. Everybody's welcome to come in. So one thought was, this is a way of showing we welcome everyone. We're lighting up the whole world. The other thought around this is that because it was full moon 3 weeks earlier in Passover, this would have been one of the darkest nights that we would have. And they needed the lamps, they needed all those lamps because there would have been really no moonlight and very little starlight. So they needed to have lamps in order for him to go from 6 o'clock at night all the way to daybreak the next day. So the other thought is because if there was a full moon, he could have probably talked with the light of the moon. I don't know whether this is an open forum or whatever. Again, these are not covered anywhere, either in Corinthians or Romans or anywhere else, that we get any clue as to why that's the case. So again, you do your own study here. It's not really important, but it's just interesting how you have these little phrases thrown in out of nowhere. Luke put it there for a reason. He put this last verse 12 in there for a reason, and they were not a little comforted. He's basically saying the church gained great confidence that God was leading them. They gained great boldness when they saw this young man come in and resurrected. That's what Luke is trying to say.
Okay, let's do our final section tonight, verses 13 through 16. Then when they went ahead to the ship and sailed to Assos, they're intending to take Paul on board. So he had given intending to go on foot. I'm going to read that again. Then we went ahead to the ship and sailed to Assos. They're intending to take Paul on board with us. For so he had given intending himself to go on foot. So the group, the group of men, this entourage, is getting on a boat. They're in Troas and they want to sail to Assos. And Paul is supposed to get on this boat and go. And Paul says, you know what? You guys go, I'm walking. This is like a 30-some mile journey, I think. So Paul decides to go on foot. And then he met us in Azos, and we took him on board in Azos, and we came to Mytilene. Mytilene is right here. We sailed from there the next day and came to Chicos, which is here. Following day, arrived at Samos and stayed at Trogalilium in Samos. The next day we came to Miletus, which is here behind the things. And then Paul decided to sail past Ephesus so that he would not have to spend time in Asia, for he was hurrying to be in Jerusalem, if possible, on the day of Pentecost. So my first question, you don't have an answer here. I kind of explained and stumbled over the scripture. Paul chose to travel to Troas on foot, but the other people went on the ship. Why did he change that? Well, he had heard that they suspect that or it may be written they gathered it from his letters, that he had heard rumors or intentions that, so what they had around, that all of the Jews traveled back to Jerusalem for certain feasts. And we know he's trying to get back for Passover. He already missed
Passover.
He missed Passover. He's trying to get back
For Pentecost.
excuse me. And so they had what they called pilgrim ships. The pilgrim ships would come, they're Jewish, they're run by Jewish companies. The pilgrim ships would come to the different ports, pick up the pilgrims, take them to Jerusalem, and then bring them back. It was a transport, like a bus, a pilgrim bus, but it was by ship. And being Jews, he had heard some things that didn't set well with him, and that there was a plot to throw him overboard. So he was like, okay, I think I'm just gonna go ahead, and you guys go ahead, and I'm gonna walk. And so, interesting, but that's what they surmise happened, why he changed his mind there. Also, if he had anybody walking with him, it gave him an extra 2 days, maybe a day or two, to talk with people, to teach people, to do things, or it gave him some very much needed alone time to just regroup and think. So we don't know exactly why, but most people surmise he got wind of a plot.
So the last question here is, Paul loved Ephesus so much, and we talked about his emotions that he had leaving and embracing them and all that. And then it said, for Paul had decided to sail past Ephesus. He went right past there, going back. So why did he bypass Ephesus when he had so much love and he thought he would never go back again? He'd never see these people again. Why did he bypass it? Or avoid it, should I say?
He wanted to get home, and he knew if he stopped, he'd probably stay a long time.
And that's the answer. Then it's right on the head. He was planning to get back to Passover, and he got delayed by another attempt on his life and missed Passover. Now he's trying to get back for Pentecost. Remember, every able-bodied Jew, Paul's still a Jew, I'm sorry, every able-bodied Jew has to go to these 3 festivals they're mandated to go to if possible. So he's still trying to get back to Jerusalem for Pentecost. He's missed Passover with some of the other calamities that have happened along the way. And so what most people agree, then, is exactly what you said. He had all these friends and buddies and all his cohorts in Ephesus. There's no way he could stop there without spending 2 or 3 days, and he's already pushing to try to get to Jerusalem before Passover, before Pentecost. So that's probably the real reason. But we're going to find he does, in the next 2 weeks when we get back together, he does go out and ask the elders of Ephesus to come meeting. So while he bypasses it, it's not his last meeting with the elders. So with that, any other last minute comments or questions?
I was going to go over this really quick, and we can look at it again. It's because we're kind of out of time, but I found this map very interesting, and I didn't know this. But we have the first journey, which was through Galatia, and on this journey, after he had visited the Galatians, he wrote his letter to the Galatians. So that was during his first journey. His second journey is in blue, okay, and in blue he wrote letters to the Thessalonians. All right, First and Second Thessalonians he wrote from Corinth. All right. But then on this third journey, we see he was pretty busy we say, oh, he was 3 months down here in Corinth. Well, from Corinth, and he wrote 1 Corinthians from Ephesus. So he'd been in Corinth, he's writing back to them, taking care of some things that he had seen. He visits again, then he writes his second letter to Philippi. And all his 3 months in Corinth, he was writing Romans. So these are 3 huge letters that are very important to us today that he was writing on this third journey. And then he had all these last letters written on his 4th journey from Rome. But I found this really interesting. Like, what did he do with all this time he was there? Well, he was teaching, but he was also writing like crazy. So
Yeah, go back to that slide. And it's interesting, you may hear this, and this is a very good slide to see it. You have Paul's epistles, right? That's what these letters are all epistles. They're letters to the churches. Well, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, and Philemon, and Timothy. The 4 of those plus Timothy is really referred to as the prison epistles. So they were written most likely while he was in prison. And so this kind of gives you a good layout of how all that comes together. And as we said earlier, every indication Luke is with him now all the way through the end. So Luke never abandons him at this point. So that's a very good summary. Any other questions or wrap up? Close in prayer.
let's close in prayer. Our dear Heavenly Father, thank you. Thank you for this word. So fascinating, and all these little details that you give us. I just pray that you would quicken our eye and our mind so that as we're reading, we don't just skim over and miss really, really interesting and important nuggets that bring your word to life and to just give us such a deeper and richer understanding. We thank you, God, for this amazing book. We thank you for your amazing son, the work he did on the cross for us. We need you. I just pray that our prayer requests primary today are people that need you so badly and they don't see their way to it, how much they need you. And I just pray that you would use us, use other people to let them come to a point where they realize they need you. We all do. We just thank you for being there for us, waiting for us, accepting us, welcoming us. And we just praise you and thank you for that. Please be with us as we go through this week. We praise you in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.